In this video, we're going to be talking about important factors that influence fights in Reflex that are not directly related to your item play. So that means your aim, how you use each weapon, and how effectively you move your character in combat. We're going to talk about a lot of information in this video, and some of it's going to be pretty advanced, so it's not realistic for you as a new player to incorporate all of these things at once into your play. But by being aware of all the different concepts, you'll have an improved understanding of the reasons why you're losing to a stronger player, what they're doing that you're not, and which aspects you need to focus on to improve. If you're able to effectively integrate any one of these concepts into your play, you will improve, and the first step to doing that is being aware of them. In a low-level duel, just picking up the armors is enough to win, but as your opponents improve, you'll be forced to use more and more of these concepts to gain an advantage, and eventually, when you get very good at the game, you're pretty much using all of them in some way or another. The first factor we're going to talk about is aim. And aim can be very deceiving when you're learning the game, because before the high level, people have a wide variation in their aim ability, and also a wide variation in their other ability to play the game. So you'll have situations where people make mistakes, and they get away with it because of aim, or people play really well otherwise and have bad aim and can make up for it. But at the high level, pretty much everyone has decent aim or really good aim. So if you're focusing on aim and worried about that, it won't get you very far. And something you see a lot is players at a low level will come into the game from CSGO or TF2 or a game where their aim is very practiced and very solid, and they will just crush all the other low-level players on pure aim, and they'll think, oh, I'm so good at Reflex, I'm getting so much better at it. And yeah, they're being successful. But they'll get to the mid-level-ish, and they will hit a complete wall.
This game is over because I didn't hit any shots.
Because they're to the point where, hey, the people around me can aim pretty decently as well now. I can't just win on aim. And because their aim was so strong off the start, they never learned how to actually play the game. They never focused on the other factors. And this is really why, yes, aim is important, yes, aim is a big factor in the game, but don't focus on it. Worry about all the other factors, because that's what's going to make the difference of whether you're a really good player or not. Everybody is going to be aiming well, and your aim will get better just the more you play the game. The next thing we're going to talk about is weapon choice. I see a lot of new players favoring only the rockets, for example, but each weapon has its strengths and weaknesses. In general, rockets are going to be stronger the closer you are to your enemy. If your enemy's up here with the ion cannon, for example, especially because it's higher up than you and also it's mid-range, these are very easy to dodge. You might hit one of them, but chances are he's just going to go back and forth and have a really easy time of it. If you're next to him, though, there's not enough time for him to react to your rockets and dodge them, and rockets do a lot more damage in close range than pretty much anything else in the game. So you're going to want to use the rockets in close range fights, but especially those with choke points or if the enemy's pushing you around a corner. Something like this is just perfect for the rockets if the enemy's trying to attack you from the bridge. There's more to rockets than that, though, and it kind of acts as your all-purpose weapon. You'll see players who don't have a reason to hold another weapon holding the rockets. That's because even at ranges where it's not very effective, spam can be very effective. There's not really a downside to shooting rockets. Most of the time, you're never going to run out of them, unless you go crazy with it. And every rocket you shoot, if you know generally where your enemy is, puts pressure on him and can deny him. When you're cycling, for example, and you're going into this red room, you need to be aware of the entrances to the room. So there's the teleporter exit here, and there's up the stairs here. Based on the sound of your enemy, you can usually rule out that he's not coming this way. And with the rocket, you can spam these entrances, cover the room, and if he pushes you, you're ready for a fight. If you use the grenades to cover for this, that's fine from angles that are pretty safe, like that. But if you spam from an angle like this with grenades, if he pushes you, you're totally unprepared for the fight. If he pushes you and you have the rocket, you're ready for that fight already. So this is why you see people using the rockets a lot and spamming a lot, because there's really no downside to doing it. And if you don't know what weapon to hold, you should probably be holding the rockets. The ion cannon is probably your next most important weapon. It's about the range from here to that wall, and in any range that it's effective, it's about equally effective. So unlike the rockets that get more effective the closer you get because it's an inconsistent weapon, kind of an all or nothing weapon that depends on your enemy dodging, the ion cannon is pretty much limited by your aim. Yeah, you can make it harder for your enemy to hit you with 80 strafing and that sort of thing in a fight, but really it's not a dodgeable weapon, and it'll do consistent damage for you. An ideal fight with the ion cannon is going to be a mid-range fight in an open space. You're going to find a lot of these in this middle room of Pocket Infinity. The ion cannon is also very consistent, so if you're right next to him, or if you're further away, or if you're at the maximum range of the ion cannon, you're going to do roughly the same amount of damage. With the rockets, on the other hand, they're going to do much more damage per second than the ion cannon at very close range, but they're going to get worse and worse the further you go back because your opponent is going to have an easy time dodging them. The ion cannon stays consistent. So if we go back to this example where rockets weren't very good and they're going to be inconsistent and hard to hit, the ion cannon is going to be the best choice for this fight if your enemy is up there. There are a couple other things to keep in mind with the ion cannon. Of course, your effectiveness with all the weapons is going to increase if your enemy is pushing towards you, but especially with the ion cannon. For example, in this fight, if your enemy has rockets and he's coming up these steps to push you, pushing towards the ion cannon in an open space like this is complete death for your enemy. This makes it a very good defensive choice for countering what's called plus forward play, or when your enemy is constantly pushing towards you to fight. Another special thing to keep in mind about the ion cannon is pinning. So if your enemy's above you on a platform and wanting to drop down on you, and you'll have cases like this on pretty much all the main duel maps, the ion cannon is going to be the best choice for that situation because of pinning. So the ion cannon is a little bit of knockback, and you can hold them in the air with it and do a whole lot of damage to them. Just roast a hole in their shorts and there's nothing they can do about it. So that makes the ion cannon the best choice for a situation like this, and it's something you should keep in mind. But your aim has to be solid, and you have to be ready for him to drop. There's really only one thing to keep in mind with the bolt rifle, and that's a rule that you should follow when you're thinking about using it. Just keep in mind that if the enemy can retaliate against you with any weapon other than his own bolt rifle, after you fire it, you should not use it in that case. So what I mean by this is if your enemy is way over here, this would be fine to use the bolt rifle, because the only thing they can retaliate with is their own bolt rifle. They can't retaliate effectively with rockets or ion cannon. But if your enemy's close to you, like right here for example, you should not be using the bolt rifle because they have the ability to retaliate with weapons other than their own bolt rifle. It's just a general rule to keep in mind. But it doesn't always have to do with distance. So for example, if you're close to your enemy and he's going through this teleporter, it's fine to use the bolt rifle because he's not going to be able to retaliate. If you're close to the enemy, like he's on this bridge right here, and you use the bolt here, it wouldn't be a bad case to use the bolt because you're not going to get punished during the reload time. He's not able to retaliate because as soon as you shoot him, you can duck around the corner and disengage the fight. So this rule is a good thing to keep in mind all the time when deciding whether to use the bolt or not. If the enemy can retaliate with any weapon other than his own bolt, you should be using a different weapon. Otherwise, go right ahead. Just a side note on the bolt rifle, it's very important to consider the consistency of each weapon when you're deciding which weapon to use. So you see a lot of people who have this kind of bad habit of switching to the bolt rifle at the end of fights to last hit the enemy. And yeah, sometimes it works and it looks really cool, but duel is all about consistency. And if you miss with it, you're going to get totally steamrolled in a lot of cases. And if you're switched to the rocket launcher to try and last hit the enemy, it'll do the same job in a lot of cases, and you won't have that same risk. So don't get in the habit of switching to the bolt rifle to last hit enemies in fights, because on the long run, it's not going to be good for your play. The thing with the bolt rifle is you've really got to consider that reload time before you take the shot. In typical shooter games like Counter-Strike or Call of Duty where you have guns, where you pick when to reload, and so you shoot for a while, you duck behind cover, and you reload, and then you pop back out when the gun is done. You sort of have to think of it that way, but it's for every single shot of the gun. Of course, the reload time is nowhere close to the length of time of reloads in typical shooter games, but the game itself is a lot faster. So you really only have to duck out of view for a short moment in Reflex. But if you're not careful about using the gun and you're caught out in the open after that shot, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if they're able to punish you with weapons other than their own bolt rifle. Since so much of effectively using the bolt rifle relies on map knowledge for angles and management of risk, this is an example of a weapon that's going to get a lot better and more useful for you the more you learn about the game. But when you're a new player, rockets and ion cannon are the weapons you should favor mostly, and your bolt rifle usage will get more effective the better you get at the game. As for these other weapons like the shotgun and the plasma, if you pick them up off of a fresh spawn, it's definitely the best thing you've got and you should use them. But in most situations, the rockets and the ion cannon, once you have those, are going to cover the fights a little bit better than those two guns. Although the shotgun can be really good to finish off low health enemies if you don't have anything better to do it with. As for the grenades, it's a good weapon you can use to spam angles that you're not able to really effectively get to with the rockets. But it's an example of a weapon that's going to get more effective the better you get at the game, like the bolt gun, because it relies on map knowledge of different angles that are effective to spam. At first, you're not going to be able to make use of all of the good angles to spam with the grenades, but it'll obviously get better as you play the game. The grenades are obviously just a bad weapon to use in a fight, but sometimes you're caught off of a fresh spawn and the grenades are all you have, and then you should just use it as a rocket launcher and try and direct hit your enemy with it and defend yourself. Weapons other than the rockets, the ion cannon, and the bolt aren't necessarily bad, but on average, they're going to be less useful in any situation. Like the situation where shotgun is better than anything else, or where plasma is better than anything else, comes up much more rarely than a situation where rockets, ion cannon, or bolt is the best weapon. So those three can pretty much cover all the situations for you on average well enough that you shouldn't need to use the others most of the time if you have the choice. I think this is going to be the best way to explain weapon advantage. It's you on the left in green and your enemy on the right in gray. He's mad because he does not have the weapon advantage. In this situation, he has rockets, you also have rockets. It's going to be hard to stop your opponent from getting rockets. There's 2 on every map, and you're probably not going to have that situation very often. The ion cannon, on the other hand, is different. You can keep your opponent from getting it and keep your weapon advantage. In this situation, you have the ion cannon, and he doesn't. These red circles are the effective range of rockets. So, yeah, the rocket is decent at this mid-range fight, but this close distance is the range where rockets are really dominant. But you have the ion cannon. Right now, you could take a rocket fight against him, and it would be perfectly even, perfectly fine. But here is the effective range of the ion cannon. If you take the rocket fight, you give him a chance. If you take the ion cannon out and stay out of the range of the rockets, but within the range of the ion cannon, no matter what he does, if he gets closer to you to try and get within the effective range of the rockets, you should back up and stay within the effective range of the ion cannon, but out of his effective range. So that's what weapon advantage is. In this fight, if it's in the open against the ion cannon, he has no chance at all. If you were to just take the rocket fight, it's an even fight, but you can do so much better. You can make it so that there's nothing he can do. And that's why the shortcut to weapon advantage is using the weapon that they don't have. Because you'll subconsciously take a fight good for your weapon and bad for the enemy's weapon. Because weapons are good in their one little area. Rockets best up close, ion cannon best in mid-range, bolt best in long range. And if you use the weapon that they don't have, that means you are playing to your weapon's strengths and at the same time playing to their weapon's weaknesses. There are a few common situations you're going to run into where weapon advantage is relevant. The most common one is probably the one I used in that example where one player has ion cannon and one player doesn't. The player without ion cannon wants to get close, and the player with ion cannon wants to keep distance. Another common situation is when one player has bolt rifle and one player doesn't. Since there's not really any answer to the long-range power of bolt rifle if the other opponent is not respecting the angles, you should really make good use of bolt rifle advantage by keeping a lot of distance from your opponent and playing Counter-Strike like poke angles on him a lot because there's really nothing he can do about it in wide open spaces until he gets a bolt rifle of his own. Another case is when you have rockets and you have all the weapons and they have almost nothing. Like you're spawn killing them, you're in a lot of control, and they only have shotgun, let's say, off the spawn. In that case, you really want to factor in the consistency of your weapon when choosing which weapon to use. The rockets will do the job in killing them because you're so far ahead in stack and weaponry. Pretty much any weapon will do the job. Rockets have the higher potential to kill them in close range, but ion cannon is often the better choice just because it's going to be more consistent. And duel is all about consistency. Consistency within that one duel, and consistency in being able to win many games in a row in the case of a tournament. Let's go over some examples of fights where weapon choice is relevant. Let's take a look at this fight. So the situation is that I have full control, and I have a lot more stack than he does. He's recently respawned on this side of the map, so I know he can't have ion cannon. So since I have so much of an advantage, I could rush into a fight with him and take the rocket fight and almost guaranteed to win that fight. But what I'm going to do instead, since I know that he has rockets, I have the choice of any weapon to use, and he doesn't have ion cannon, I'm going to take the ion cannon fight instead, and take a fight that's out of the effective range of the rockets that he has no answer for. Here's another example of weapon advantage. I kill him and he spawns on the other side of the map, collects that armor, and collects the rockets. Now I know in this situation that if I were to take the rocket fight, it would be a 50-50 fight, because our stacks are relatively close to even, and I have the drop on him, so there's a slight advantage for me in that case. But I know he doesn't have the ion cannon, so I use the ion cannon, keep out of close range for the rockets, and I'm able to win that fight in a consistent and safe way. In this fight, we're both on low stack, and we're fighting over that red armor. We also both have all the weapons, so weapon advantage is not going to be a factor. I'm not going to be able to use a weapon he doesn't have. In this situation, my goal is keeping him from getting to that red armor. As soon as he picks that up, I have no chance in the fight, and I would have to leave or die. So which weapon should I choose in this situation? If I were to choose the ion cannon, I would move to the left into that more open space for the weapon and try and do as much damage to him as I can. If I were to choose the bolt rifle, I would try and bolt him. I wouldn't do enough damage to kill him, even if I hit him, and I couldn't do nothing to stop him from getting to that red. The ion cannon would also be a mistake, because even though I would be doing decent damage to him, it does nothing to stop him from getting to that red. The rockets are the weapon with the zoning potential, and that's the weapon I'm going to use. So I play this close angle on the right, because I know, and he knows, that the effectiveness of my rockets are going to increase greatly if he pushes me around this corner, and that's just going to be instant death for him, and he's not going to do it. So his options are leaving the fight through the teleporter to the right, or pushing for the red. And since the fight is relatively even, and he has a good chance of getting to that red, he's of course going to push for it. But by choosing the rockets, I have the potential to zone him. And you can see that he takes the risk to push for it, and because of my weapon usage, I have the chance of knocking him away and winning that fight, and that's what happens. So the rule with the bolt rifle is that if the enemy is able to punish you with any other weapon than their own bolt rifle during the reload time, you shouldn't take the shot. In this case, he's close to me and could easily punish me with any other weapon, especially because he has higher stack than me. But I know I'm safe to use the bolt rifle, because I just instantly go back through the teleporter as I fire, and he has no chance to punish me during that reload. In this fight, I know that my enemy is on that top yellow platform, so I get my ion cannon ready, which is typically the best weapon for that fight. And I start using it, but then the fight turns to a closer range hallway fight, and I switch to the rockets because it's the best weapon for up-close fights, especially with choke points, and it works out. In this fight, my enemy is at mid-range pushing towards me, so I use the ion cannon, the best weapon for that situation. And then he starts getting closer to me and starts coming up towards a choke point, so I switch to the rockets and use those. And then he gets further away from me and is too far away for me to effectively use the rockets or the ion cannon. And since he's falling and far away from me, there's really no risk in me being punished for the reload. So I switched to the bolt rifle to finish him off. One of the biggest factors that determines your effectiveness in combat in Reflex is your movement within that fight. So that doesn't mean how quickly you move around the map, but it means your dodging and your positioning within that one little engagement. One of the great things about Reflex is the wide variety of fights you run into within one game. And so you're going to have to be able to develop different combat skills and different movement skills for each individual situation. For example, in an ion cannon versus ion cannon fight out in the open, you want to strafe back and forth pretty quickly, but not so fast that you're basically standing still, but not so slowly that they can track you easily, and you want to do a lot of changes of direction. In a closer range fight against the rockets, you can't dodge in the same way as you would want to against the ion cannon. Those short back and forth strafes that are effective in an ion cannon fight are going to leave you standing in relatively the same area and be a very easy target for the rockets. Instead, you want to take longer motions with your strafes and be more unpredictable. Another trick with that is strafing or changing direction in line with the firing speed of your enemy's rocket launcher. The idea of this is that when the enemy is firing, he is anticipating where you're going to be. And if you're able to change directions every single time he shoots, you will be able to change directions from where he predicted you to be and be more effective at dodging. Talking about dodging in this way is a little bit awkward because it's hard to describe through words, but it's going to be a skill that you naturally build the more you play the game. And for a lot of you with previous FPS experience, transferring that to Reflex will come very naturally to you. As far as dodging the bolt rifle, you can't really dodge the bolt rifle since it's just a straight up hit scan gun. What you can do is reduce the chance of you being hit significantly if you play it right. The best way to minimize the chance of you being bullied too much by the bolt rifle is by either avoiding long angles, always knowing where your enemy is, but most importantly, pressuring your enemy with spam by the rockets or the grenades. Even though the rockets are very effective at close range, even if it's a very far away bolt rifle angle, if you can preempt him and take that angle off the table for him by spamming it with rockets, he can't safely take that spot to bolt you, or he's going to get hit by the rocket. So if you can preempt his bolt shot against you, that's the most effective way to avoid being hit by the bolt rifle, because you can't actually dodge it once he is aiming it at you. It's really down to whether he hits you or not. Reflex is not a clear-cut game, and there are so many factors going on at any given time that I can say, oh, well, this is how you should dodge against rockets, or this is how you should dodge against ion cannon, but in a real match, that rocket fight is probably not going to stay a rocket fight. It might turn into an ion cannon fight, somebody might pull out the plasma, and you might get knocked into lava. But you really have to be on the fly and moving for what the situation requires. And that's not something that I can explain to you in an analytical way through a video. But these general movement guidelines should get you on the right track. The next big factor we're going to talk about is the pushing player disadvantage. And what I mean by that is that there's a built-in disadvantage for the player who is taking the initiative in any situation. The player who is pushing towards the enemy and I guess chasing after him and trying to engage a fight is going to have a built-in disadvantage. And it makes sense if you just think about the way that the maps are. If one player is backing up around the corners, he knows exactly where he needs to fire the weapon to be very effective against the player who's pursuing him. And this is just basic to the balance of the game and how things work. And it's not true in every situation, but it's true in most of them. And you can really use this to your advantage. You see a lot of players having a play style where they bait the enemy into always pushing them. So even if they have an advantage in the fight, let's say, they would always prefer to have the enemy pushing them. And so this is something to keep in mind, that if you're the player with slightly higher stack than your opponent, but you are the one taking the initiative and pushing into the fight, in most cases, that might actually swing things in his favor despite you having a stack advantage. the built-in pushing player disadvantage is a very large factor in determining how fights will go. You can really use this factor to your advantage in a duel, because like a lot of things in Reflex, the threat of something happening and the pressure that comes from that is actually more influential on the actions of players than the thing itself. For example, the ability to pin people with the ion cannon, like I talked about earlier, a lot of times just the threat of being pinned will have more of an impact than the actual pin, which may never occur because the other player is just respecting that. And the same thing is true for pushing player disadvantage, because if you're the player with lower stack, if you can show the other player that if he has higher stack and he pushes you, you're still going to win the fight anyway, or it's going to be a big gamble for him, he's going to be afraid to push you. And if you're an out-of-control player, that just gives you more time and more freedom to try and retake control. And the same thing is true if you are the in control from that perspective. You need to be aware of the disadvantage that's just built in to your play every time you want to use your stack to rack up kills on the enemy. And by having this advantage in mind, you can more effectively approach your opponent, get more kills on the board more efficiently and in a more safe way. This pushing player disadvantage is a general concept that you're going to be able to apply to specific situations in your games. You can't go over every single case where all of these general guidelines are going to be relevant, because they're relevant in almost every situation in almost every single game. By understanding all of these guidelines, you should be able to have the tools you need, maybe not in the moment, to decide what the best play or the best way to handle a situation is, but looking back at your play after the game, thinking about it, and really trying to improve at the game. A big part of that is being able to justify your own decisions by understanding general concepts of what makes a play good and what makes a play less good. An effective way to do this is to look at players who are very good at the game, high-level people, and try and look for patterns in their decision making. See how they use each weapon in a situation where that weapon is effective, or see how they make use in their playstyle of the pushing player disadvantage by trying to bait the other player a lot, and try and incorporate these things into your play. By teaching all of these general concepts, it's meant to give you the tools you need to improve at the game. Let's do a short review. Aim is obviously a big factor in Reflex, but it's a trap to focus on it too much, especially because once you get past the mid-level or so, it's going to be all of the other factors in the game that determine who wins and loses, not so much aim. In Reflex, each weapon is strong in some ways and weak in others, and you should be switching in between them and always trying to use the best weapon for a situation. The rockets are probably the best weapon to hold when you don't have any reason to be using another weapon, especially because you should be using the rockets to spam entrances where the enemy is coming at you from. There's not really much of a downside to doing it. And in general, rockets are going to be the strongest up close because there's not enough time to dodge them. The ion cannon is a very consistent weapon, and usually the best choice in mid-range fights. You can use the ion cannon to either pin enemies, or at least do a lot of damage to them if they try and drop down on you. The one thing to remember about the bolt rifle is to not use it if the enemy can punish you during the reload using any weapon effectively besides his own bolt rifle. You need to be very careful of that reload before you take the shot. The shotgun and the plasma are situationally strong, but the three main weapons, the rockets, the ion cannon, and the bolt rifle, are going to fill more situations better on average. And the grenade launcher can be used to spam places where the rockets can't. And finally, in most situations, the pushing player has a built-in disadvantage in fights, mostly because he's predictable and can be pre-fired, so be careful not to get baited into bad fights, and use this knowledge for your own benefit in your games. There are a lot of other factors in Reflex that determine the outcome of fights that were not covered in this video, but a lot of those are going to be self-explanatory. For example, if you have a plan, executing it faster is always going to be better and give you a higher chance at success, and that's where practice and drilling comes in. I can't go over every single important factor in Reflex, but if you know a lot of the major ones, and you can see these factors being used by other high-level players when you're examining their play, you should be able to think for yourself and use these tools to help build your own play style and improve your own games. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this video is to get an appreciation of how many factors you have to work with in Reflex to gain an advantage, and how aim is just one of many. One other thing is that as you focus on improving these individual factors, you're going to see diminishing returns on how much that benefits your play. It should make sense, but for example, if you're just coming from a non-FPS background and your aim is pathetic, you're going to see an incredible improvement in your play once you get your aim up to an acceptable level. But once your aim is decent, it's likely that improving another factor would cause a much greater improvement in your play. So when you're looking at this video, you should be looking down that list and decide where you are strongest and where you're weakest, and bring up your play from the bottom rather than continually focusing on factors that you're already strong in. Remember that if you want to get better, there's no substitute for playing a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.